Iowa State losing to BYU in the Big 12 tournament is a blessing in disguise, and for more ways than one. Trust me, I am not going crazy today on Locked On Cyclones.
You are Locked On Cyclones, your daily podcast on the Iowa State Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Shout out to you for being here every single day and making this your first watch or listen of the day. I appreciate it more than you know. Wherever you're watching or listening, be sure to subscribe so we can prove once and for all that it is, in fact, a Cyclone state. Today, we're talking all about the men's basketball team. Obviously, the loss to BYU. What does that mean? Are there pros? Are there cons? And Curtis Jones moving forward. Obviously, you knew Curtis Jones was going to be a point of conversation today. How could he not be? All right. Well, we'll get to that in the third segment. Don't worry. I can't wait. But before we get that far, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the loss before we dive into what happened in this game and moving forward. Okay. Let's start in the present. Okay. Because the present is just that. It's like a little bit of a gift. Okay, so let's cherish it. Iowa State losing to BYU might seem like an absolute worst case scenario. Oh my gosh, Iowa State can't win the Big 12 title. I don't think that's the case. I actually think that this was possibly the way that this went might have been the best case scenario for Iowa State. You go to the absolute wire with a BYU team who is arguably the hottest team in the nation right now. You fall short. That's fine. Now you've got a week to 8 days to rest up and get ready for March Madness. The one that is kind of, the big deal, right? That's why they put it kind of at the end of this whole thing. They don't do it before the Big 12 tournament. I know that. But why would this? You want to win as many games as you can, right? And here we've talked about a few times, should Iowa State lose? Is it a benefit for them to lose? And at the end of the day, really my conversation kind of goes towards, I want them to win. I want them to try to go out, get a win. As you know, you got to keep momentum, right? That is a very real thing. Luckily, I actually kind of think Iowa State gained momentum and still gets rest now. Iowa State no longer has to worry about these last 2 games in 2 days if they were to go on to try to win a Big 12 tournament championship or a Big 12 tournament title or whatever you want to call it. They get to rest those days now. And I think that BYU game is one of the it wasn't the best game they've played, and we'll talk more about that in the second segment. Don't worry, because right now we're worried more about rest, but that was a really solid game from them, and I'll leave it at that for now. I think the biggest thing, though, is the rest. And let's talk about that first. Obviously, Keyshawn Gilbert and Tamin Lipsey did not play against BYU. Okay. And Iowa State has been riddled with injuries all season ever since Mila Momcilovic's hand situation. Obviously, broken hand, sits out 7 games. That's a whole dicey situation. Comes back. Then you're missing Curtis Jones. You're missing Keyshawn Gilbert against Houston. And then Keyshawn Gilbert's still out, but Curtis Jones back for Oklahoma State. And then it's this whole thing. And now we're at the Big 12 tournament. And now we're missing Keyshawn and Tamin. And okay, now we can just take a second. We've got a whole week. Everybody can sit back, relax, and rest up for this humongous tournament. It's huge. It's a big tournament by all measurements, right? And it's probably the most exciting outside of this game, which, like I said, we'll cover that in the second segment. This game was beyond electric. But, what do the guys think of this rest period? Because that's kind of where my mind goes immediately. What do they think of it? What do I think of this situation? What I'm saying here is what I think is completely irrelevant is in the terms of the team. They're not sitting around waiting to see what Locked On Cyclone says, all right, let's feel that way about this. No, they obviously have their own opinions, right? There are a bunch of other humans out there. And how do they feel about this whole situation? Because that's where my mind goes immediately. And Tamin Lipsey said that now we get to take a step back and come together as a group, rest our bodies, get healthy, get back on the practice court, get feeling good, and see where we go. I think that is arguably the quote of the day. It's probably not. There's one that I think might top that, but this is a great perspective. Everybody can finally get back on the same page. We can all rest up. We can spend some time together, get healthy, back on the practice court, which I'll talk more about in a second, and then get feeling good, right? And then we just go. Then it's March Madness, baby. We're off and running. Okay. I think that the element of everyone coming together as a group, as he said right off the bat in that one, step back, right? We're no longer playing these games. We can take a step back, deep breath, and then we can all come together as a group and move forward. I think that part is actually arguably one of the biggest, and obviously Taman, one of the biggest leaders on this team, because this team has felt so in and out and wonky the whole season with, okay, now this team's got to learn to play without Mila Momcilovic, and it was pretty obvious that this dude is a real component to this team. And then they get him back, and now we're missing more guys. Okay, how do we approach Houston, who is, I mean, back-to-back Big 12 champs now? Like, how do they, regular season, how do they approach that game? And then, okay, well, now we dropped that one, but it was close. We can, this is who we are right now. No Keyshawn. All right, we can go out and get Oklahoma State. Now that one goes haywire, and everybody's kind of just, it felt like it was like the world was spinning and nothing was falling in the right place. This is a moment where the storm can kind of settle, the dust can settle. This whole team can finally get back. It feels like almost like a little bit of like a mini off season. Like, it's like we've got time. Okay. We can get a moment, find out who we are again with all of these guys on the practice court. Okay. And I'll come back to that. And then go into the tournament refreshed, reinvigorated, and ready to roll. Now, the practice court thing, that's something we talked about a little bit this year. When these guys are hurt or sick or whatever, injured, like Milan and Keyshawn and potentially Taman now, like, they don't practice either. So you're spending, yes, the 7 games of Milan's tenure out without him, but you're also spending however many weeks that was as well without him. So that's something that you have to keep in mind. These guys are practicing without them. The vibe of, I mean, obviously Milan is connected to the team still. It's not like he has to go get shipped off to another state for rehab. It's not that bad, but it's definitely impacting the team and the way they practice. So if they can find a way to get everybody back on the practice court and really hone in on the things that this team needs to work on to get better and go into March Madness fresh, I mean, that's a recipe for success. And yes, the loss to BYU stings. Of course it does. And it was in Hilton South after a loss at the actual Hilton to BYU just days earlier. I'm sure that the players are feeling that. I'm sure that there is an element of, man, we really couldn't get it done. But also at the same time, missing two top guys. And like I said, that's a second segment thing. But I do need to throw that out there right away because I think that's important. And so moving forward, this is an excellent opportunity. They played early yesterday. Okay. You get all of Thursday now. They can get back up to Ames. These guys can get back in their own beds. They can get back into their own daily habits, their own daily routines. Okay. Which TJ pitches and preaches about so much. Okay. We can get back into this vibe. We're all right. We're going to be fine. Deep breath. Get back on the practice court, back in the meeting rooms. Everybody's there. Everybody's working towards one goal. It's like a moment of realignment. Like, these guys are all able to take a second, kind of get in a circle, kumbaya, like, okay, all of our brains in the right spot. Now let's go towards this common goal. And as I said, they early on Thursday. So now you basically get all of Thursday as rest coming off a BYU game. Then Friday, the weekend, and then all the way up until, I mean, I don't know if they'll play the first or second, but it'll be Thursday or Friday. So if it's Friday, you basically got, like, depending on the timing, maybe 9 days almost even, you could argue, in there of rest. And maybe 8 if it's Thursday. But that like, I want to know when they play, because I do think that day matters for Taman Lipsey, who was like 60%, was kind of feeling it, but it would have been really dicey. And Keyshawn Gilbert, who's been dealing with this groin injury allegedly since the beginning of conference play. This team is banged up. So is every other team. But I think every day matters for these guys. I absolutely do. So I'm very curious to see whether they fall in that first round of the tournament. And I will say really quickly, I think it was a great call by TJ to basically say, okay, if you're like not 100%, we're not putting you out there. That's kind of what this was. Now, there's going to be some guys who got little tweaks here, little banged up there. You still need to put 5 guys on the court at a time, and you need to have some backups so they don't play 40 entire, minutes. Like, that has to happen. But really, it was like, okay, you guys aren't 100%. We're going to get you ready for the March Madness, for the big dance. And I love that play. It's absolutely the right move. And I think that there's a big conversation right now around how important is how important are these conference tournaments with, I mean, you saw what happened to Cooper Flag. And I think we saw that reflected in TJ's decision to not push so hard for a win over BYU. I think it ends up being okay for Iowa State, actually maybe even a positive, because of the momentum that I think that they gained in that win over BYU. And we'll talk about that more coming up right after this. We are all about the stats because numbers don't lie. And when it comes to the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X, the numbers are on an MVP level. With the ability to tow up to 8,500 pounds, it can quite literally carry the whole team plus the gear wherever you need to go. It's powered by a twin-turbo V6 engine, delivering the strength and performance to handle highways, back roads, and everything in between. And with room for up to 8 people, the Armada Pro 4X is built for big crews, big adventures, and even bigger memories. Whether you're exploring off-road trails or rolling up to the arena, the Armada Pro 4X brings power, versatility, and style wherever you go. Take your adventures to new heights in the all-new Nissan Armada Pro 4X. Learn more at nissanusa.com. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories, and even who's cutting down the nets. I've got my eye on a few underdogs this year, and FanDuel makes it easy to back them with spreads, totals, and game props. With tournament games happening almost every day, there's always something exciting to bet on. The FanDuel app is simple to use, and when I win, I get paid instantly. No waiting around. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. Let's talk a little bit about Iowa State BYU. The game, well, it's kind of the most recent game of the century. It's like I can't even say that and have it be a joke. I think that might be a legitimate claim at this point. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And it seems like every time Iowa State and BYU get together on the court, it's an absolute barn burner, an instant classic every single time. And yes, the court adds to that in this one, but it didn't need to. This one was an absolute. I'm going to run out of ways to say that this was an amazing game. Let's not get too crazy with it. We don't need to use wild words. At the end of the day, BYU comes away with a win over Iowa State, 96-92. Yeah, you heard that right. 96-92 in regulation. Yeah. The score at halftime was Iowa State 53, BYU 49. And if you would have told me that was the final score after the first 6 minutes of the first time these two teams met this season, I might have told you that might be too many points. That's the difference in these two games. But yeah, this game was, I think really the only way to talk about this game was I kind of wonder if they went out there and like made the rims bigger. I think they might have made them about a foot wider for both teams. Like it was legitimately wild what we saw on the court from BYU as a whole, of course, and then Iowa State, namely Curtis Jones. Okay, Curtis Jones leads the team with 31 points. Whew. I mean, yeah, we're going to talk more about Curtis Jones in the third segment. Don't get me wrong. Let's talk about the whole game as a whole here. Obviously Curtis a part of that. So 31 points, 7 of 15 from 3. That was very remarkable. And 11 of 22 from the field, 50% there. Other high scoring Cyclones, I guess. You got Milan Momcilovic with 18. Joshua Jefferson had 14, as well as Deshaun Jackson, who had 14. So we're kind of seeing the continuance of those bigs playing really well, which I do like for sure. Now, as far as BYU, really Richie Saunders with 3 of 8 from 3 and 6 of 12 from the field. Got a boost on the free throw line, had more free throws made and attempted than Iowa State attempted. He got 8 there. So Richie Saunders ends with 23 points. And as I mentioned that, so I'll just throw this in there. Iowa State as a team went 5 of 7 from the line. Not going to talk too much about the refs. That's just not something I really need to dive into here. But that's not very many free throws. I'm not going to lie to you. Other BYU guys kind of popping off. Trevin Nell with 14 started the game with the 3 just immediately. And that was the story of this one. We'll get into that in a second. Then you had it was everybody for BYU. It really was. It felt like BYU could do no wrong, shooting 51% from the floor, 50% from 3, and then, of course, a solid 85, almost 86% from the line. Here's the crazy kind of stat of the day. BYU with 18 three-pointers. They went 18 of 36 on the day. That is a wild number. Iowa State from 3 went 13 of 30. That's also pretty crazy. Now, considering 7 of those came from Curtis Jones, that was also wild. And then this game was kind of record breaking in a lot of different senses. BYU, Iowa State, I think this was they had the tied for the most points at half, and then they had like the most points ever at the end of the game or in regulation. They had broke the most record for threes in a Big 12 tournament game with like 9 minutes to go. It was an insane game. And I will say, Iowa State shooting 33s felt wild to me. And so I ended up going back and looking. They've only shot a maximum of 28 up until this point. They did it 4 times this season. Jackson State, Iowa, UCF, and then the BYU game, obviously, just prior to this, but that was a double overtime game. I think 4 of those threes came from overtime or double overtime, so they really had 24 in regulation. So for them to shoot 33 pointers felt like wildly out of place. But there was a period in time there, I think it was 5 minutes and 22 seconds of game time, that Curtis Jones turned into a Super Saiyan Stephen Curry. Like, he was unable to miss. It was legitimately insane. I think he had 14 straight points for the Cyclones, and that was wild. I mean, it was absolutely cool. It was insane to watch. It was like the coolest thing ever. And so I'll probably never forget that, or at least I hope I don't. Big takeaways from this one. I think Iowa State came away with a win in the loss. I think momentum-wise, you play this well without a Keyshawn and Taman. We know how important those guys are. I don't think BYU scores 96 points if you have those 2 guys on the floor. Obviously, Iowa State scoring 92 points in regulation. That's awesome. That's a lot of points. We don't see that often from this squad. But then you see immediately, like, you're just reading numbers, 92 to 96. It's the next number. They gave up 96 points. So that is like slightly concerning, but this turned into kind of what the UCF game was, the first one where Iowa State scored like 108. It was kind of just like, let's just shoot the ball. Like, I know it wasn't exactly that, but it kind of turned into that, where it was nobody could really miss. I don't think that there was too much to take away from this one where it felt like Iowa State lost. It felt like Iowa State went out, played the best that they possibly could. Damarian Watson played 5 minutes, had a block out there. Cade Kelderman ended up with a 3. That was awesome. Brandon Chatfield played 12 minutes and had 6 points. Nate Heisey got a pair of 3s. So not a ton of help from the bench per se. Totaling up to, would that be 15 points? But at the end of the day, I mean, obviously there's other stats in there, so it's not like they didn't just go out. I'm not trying to diss on those guys, but this team, it's used to the 8-man rotation. And so those guys were able to step up and make it a close game. And I do think that the team feels that, right? When Cade Kelderman, who Otz talked about, like, he'll come in, before practice, then go hard at practice, and we have meetings, and he's out there after the meetings. And the team knows that, and then he goes out on the court and performs the way he does. I think that the team notices that, and I think the team, it feels the energy, like, from this game. The energy was, we probably would have won this one if we had everybody healthy. So let's feel good about this. We had the amazing stretch from Curtis Jones in there. Let's just take this as it was, move on. BYU's a great team. If they don't shoot lights out, that game might go another way. There's a very real chance of that. So at the end of the day, let's not take too much loss, in this loss. Let's try to find the wins and move on. As I said, I think this was relatively a win, 28 rebounds to 31. You slightly lose that battle. The only thing I will say, 16 assists on 37 makes is kind of rough, but at the end of the day, I think this was a big win in a loss. Obviously a big win over BYU would have probably been worth a little bit more than you got guys playing an extra game. So it's a whole give and take. But at the end of the day, this was a win. I actually like that this went the way that it did. I really thought that this was the best case scenario for Iowa State. And for, like I said, more reasons than one of them being Curtis Jones might just carry this team to a national title. And we're going to have to talk about that more coming up right after this. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app, it's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you just stop managing your money and start building wealth. When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Managing money with your partner is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Iowa State, in the loss to BYU, it felt like there were some gems in there. There wasn't too much to be completely distraught about. I do think this team will be fine moving forward. You're here with Locked On Cyclones, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. This final segment is relatively dedicated to Curtis Jones, but at the end of the day, I do kind of want to touch on some other things here, so stick with me. Curtis Jones could be the guy to take Iowa State to a national title. Yes. At the same time, it could be Milan Momcilovic. It could be Taman Lipsey. It could be Joshua Jefferson. Like, we know all of these names and we know what they're all capable of. But really, we haven't seen much takeover. I mean, Jefferson, we've seen a little bit, but the takeover we saw for about 5.5 minutes of game time from Curtis Jones against BYU was magical. Like, I rewatched the highlights and it was like, are you kidding me? I couldn't even believe it. It was just heat check after heat check, and Curtis was on one. I mean, he was on fire. And so really where I'm going with this is that Iowa State is a great team on multiple fronts. And that's what we've talked about all season long, is how great this team is in multiple ways, on the inside, on the outside, depending on where you try to shut down Iowa State, they can answer in a separate way. And Curtis Jones and his three-point shooting ability is obviously one of the best in the nation. Obviously, Big 12 first team, very legitimate basketball player, of course. And so I do wonder if that's something that this team can lean on going into March Madness, depending on the matchup they get. Can Curtis Jones continue to play this way? I think there's absolutely a real possibility of that. But also, with this team being fully healthy, I do wonder if it's a Joshua Jefferson or a Milan Momcilovic, because we haven't seen too much from Milan. He's been quiet in these ones. I mean, he still had 18 against BYU, but I don't feel like we're seeing the baby Dirk so much. We are seeing him get into the inside a little bit more. Obviously, against BYU, it felt like he was able to get in there a little bit more than usual. But I do wonder where this team kind of puts where do they hang their hat at the start of March Madness here? Because we can talk all we want about, okay, well, I still think this team's got it. They've got time to figure it out. They have a week and no games in there. So they do have time. Okay, they do. But we are like kind of up against the wall here a little bit, right? This is like when you're driving over to your destination, you've got time to think about all the things that might happen when you're there, and then you're walking down the hallway to the door. That's where we're at. We are no longer in the car going over these possibilities. We are in the hallway, like about to grab the door handle to walk into whatever dinner tea party you're attending. This is no longer like free roam. We kind of have to hone in on something here. And I'm totally okay with picking Curtis Jones. If Keyshawn Gilbert is going to be dealing with a groin injury, and he has been all year. So I don't know if this is something that just goes away. This is something that might get a little bit better, right? If they play Friday, Sunday, then you know, obviously you get about that like 5 days or whatever it is before you play again. So he can maybe kind of top it up and stay in there. But I don't think we can expect that early season Keyshawn that we have. Tamin Lipsey, it's not a huge point scorer for the Cyclones. Obviously, adds to the team in multiple ways. But at the end of the day, it's not like he's going out and scoring 31 points. So is Tamin Lipsey the guy that you kind of lean on or lean towards in these situations? I don't think so. And I don't like saying that because I do think Tamin, like, he's got to be the guy to bring the ball up the court in close, tight end of game scenarios. I don't really want anyone else doing that. I've come to that conclusion. I think that's Tamin Lipsey's job. So I'm not saying we just whoever we pick here, it's like give him the ball at all times. I don't think Iowa State has one of those guys. I think they still need to mesh together, but this team also kind of needs to pick something and do it well is kind of what I'm deciding. At the beginning of the year, I've said it. I did say it, and I said it for a long time. This team will beat you in a lot of ways. With the way that this second half of the season has gone, I kind of want Iowa State to end up picking something. And if you beat us there, we can 1B to this. And so is it Curtis Jones? I don't know. Like I said, is it Tamin? I don't think so. It's probably not Keyshawn. It's probably not Tamin. Then is it Joshua Jefferson or Deshaun Jackson on the inside? That is the strongest argument in that Curtis Jones argument right there, right? So it's Curtis Jones or kind of Joshua Jefferson on the inside. And now I did say the last few games that I wanted to go to the inside first. And so I will pick that. Okay, I would like to see Joshua Jefferson with the ball, his court vision, his mentality, his visibility, everything, his vision, just everything that he does. When he has the ball in his hands, it's a good sign. He's made a few mistakes this season. Now, he did kind of botch a pass from Kelderman late in this one that could have potentially kept Iowa State in it. I think it was like 88-93 at the time with like 25 seconds left. Like it could have kept them in, but at the end of the day, it was like, all right, now they get rest. So I don't even hate that. And we've seen, you know, obviously the kind of the fumble against BYU. I think it was the end of the first overtime when he looked up at the clock across the court and ended up dropping the pass, and it was a turnover. And we've seen some fumbles from Joshua Jefferson, but for the most part, he has played unbelievably for the Cyclones. And if you're going to hang, not just at the end of a game scenario, if you're going to kind of dedicate to one point, one style of play, I would probably pick Joshua Jefferson and or Deshaun Jackson on the inside just because of what that can get you. Extra points at the free throw line. You assert that dominance. You have the higher chance for what TJ calls a hammer, right, with those offensive rebounds and putbacks. I think that that's very real. Now, if you want to talk end of game scenarios, is Curtis Jones in that conversation? That's a answer that is kind of wishy-washy, unfortunately. I think it depends largely on how he's shot that game because we've got so many guys that can shoot. Like, I don't think you immediately turn to Curtis Jones, but if he has a game like this, you have to look his way. He was like 7 of 11, I think, at one point in the first half. Yes, of course you hand the ball to Curtis Jones at that point. But Milan, in nights where he shot 2 of 6 against BYU. If it was going to be super tight down the stretch, Milan is somehow a guy that I would trust to shoot a 3 there because he just hits those. It's in his DNA. I don't know what it is. So is this the Curtis Jones show moving forward? I think so, in a way, because they have to hang their hat on something. Okay, and obviously Joshua Jefferson on the inside is what I'm going to say they should hang their hat on, but you can't only win on the inside. And the guy on the outside I think you have to turn to is Curtis Jones because Milan can play so many different styles. He can play the 3 ball. He can drive to the inside, kind of float. He can kind of back you down, post you up a little bit. I don't think he's the 3-point guy. I don't think Keyshawn can be the 3-point guy with his finishing around the rim. I don't think Tamin Lipsey is that guy because he's more of a defensive and an effort-based guy. And obviously, he can drive to the hoop as well as anybody, more of a distributor at sometimes. And then Curtis Jones, it's not that he can't drive to the hoop, but we just don't see 3-point shooting outside of really what he's done. I mean, not on that level. So is it the Curtis Jones show? I think in some aspects, yes. I think it has to be. I think you have to turn to him for those threes. Like, especially if he's hot. But this team still needs to operate as a team because they are so good in so many different ways across the board, just across all avenues. And I think they'll be fine in March. And obviously, we got plenty of shows between now and then to talk more about it. But as it sits right now, I thought this loss to BYU was a win in more ways than just like, okay, we played well. I thought obviously that was there, but the rest as well. And then of course, Curtis Jones just popping off in this one was so fun. It really was so fun. So shout out to BYU playing hard. But Iowa State, I don't feel too bad about this. I don't feel very bad about where this team is at going into the tournament. A lot of rest, a lot of chance to get this team back on the rails. I can't wait to see what TJ Otzelberger and the boys bring to the tournament next week. If you're still watching, be sure to subscribe so you can prove once for all to Cyclone State. And really, let's enjoy this weekend. Until next time, Cyclone fans, sayonara.